What are the things a mature man eventually stops doing? Not because he becomes a perfect person, not because he suddenly has everything figured out, but because he starts to realise that some of the behaviour he used to think were protecting him are actually keeping him stuck. He stops chasing people who are clearly not interested. He stops explaining himself to people who have already decided what they think. He stops needing everyone to understand him. He stops trying to win every argument. He stops making promises to himself that he has no intention of keeping. And maybe, most importantly, he stops confusing being emotionally reactive with being strong. Because maturity isn't about becoming colder, it's about becoming more deliberate. You still get angry, you still get insecure, you still get rejected, you still have bad days, you still make mistakes. The difference is that you become better at deciding what you do with those feelings. So in this video, I'm going to give you 10 things that mature men eventually stop doing. Not because these things make you a bad person, but because they quietly make your life smaller. Number 1 is stop chasing clarity from people who aren't giving you any. This is something a lot of men struggle with. Someone becoming distant, the messages getting shorter, they stop initiating, plans become a little bit vague, and instead of simply responding to the information you're being given, you start trying to solve it. What happened? Did I do something? Are they upset with me? These are the common questions men usually ask themselves. Should I send another message? Maybe they're just busy. Maybe I should explain myself, which is the last thing you want to do in a situation like this. And suddenly you're spending enormous amounts of mental energy trying to turn somebody else's uncertainty into your own certainty. But sometimes the behaviour is the information. If someone consistently makes a little effort to maintain a connection with you, you don't necessarily need a detailed explanation. You can simply notice it and move on. This doesn't mean assuming the worst. It means refusing to build your life around possibilities. Maybe they're busy, maybe they're dealing with something, maybe they've lost interest. All these things give you information. Maybe they have their own problems to solve. You don't always need to know which explanation is correct. You can simply say this relationship doesn't currently have the level of reciprocity I want, and then adjust your behaviour accordingly. That is maturity. You don't have to hate somebody just because they're distant. You don't have to punish them. You don't have to send a dramatic goodbye message. A mature man doesn't need every door explained before he's willing to walk away from it. Number 2 is stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. There's a difference between communicating and defending yourself. Communication says this: here's what I meant. Defending yourself endlessly says another thing. It says, please understand that I'm not the person you think I am. And sometimes you really do need to clarify something, don't get me wrong. If you've hurt someone, you need to explain it, that's all right. If there's been a misunderstanding, you need to communicate it. If you made a mistake, you need to take responsibility. There are situations in life where no amount of explanation is going to change someone's opinion of you. And the more you talk, the more desperate you can start to sound. And you don't need to convince everyone that you're a good person because you know that you're a good person. You don't need to respond to every criticism because you know that you shouldn't respond to that criticism. You don't need to correct every inaccurate assumption. You don't need to prove your intentions to people who have already decided what your intentions were. Sometimes, believe it or not, but the strongest response is simply to behave consistently over time. Actions accumulate, because if someone has known you for 5 minutes and has already decided you're terrible, you probably aren't going to fix that with a 17-minute explanation. And if someone has known you for years and genuinely knows your character, one misunderstanding probably isn't going to destroy everything. Learn the difference between something that needs communication and something that simply needs to be left alone. Not every accusation requires a defence. Not every misunderstanding requires a courtroom. And not every opinion about you deserves your attention. A mature man knows when to speak. He also knows when that silence is enough. Number 3 is stop needing to have the last word. This sounds small, but it reveals a lot about you. Someone disagrees with you. They misunderstand your position. They say something you think is absolutely ridiculous. And suddenly you feel the urge to correct them. You need to respond. And that's a completely human way to do it. And then they respond, so you respond again, and now you've spent 40 minutes arguing with someone on the internet about something that won't affect your life whatsoever. But the same thing can happen in real life. You have an argument with your partner, a friend says something that annoys you, completely simple examples that we face day to day, or maybe a family member makes a comment, and instead of asking, what outcome do I actually want here, you start thinking, how do I make sure they know I'm right? Those aren't the same question. Being right and improving a situation are two different things. Sometimes you need to stand your ground. Sometimes somebody has genuinely crossed that boundary that you've drawn. Sometimes an important conversation needs to happen. But there are also moments where you realise, I could continue this conversation for another hour, but neither of us is going to understand the other person. That is when you stop. Not because you've lost, but because you've realised, you've decided your piece is way more worth than winning the exchange. A mature man doesn't need to turn every disagreement into a competition. He can say something like this, I don't agree with you, and just leave it there, because we're fighting our battles, the battles that we need to fight. He can hear an opinion he thinks is stupid without feeling it personally threatened by it. He can admit, you might be right, I might be wrong. He can even change his mind oftentimes, and that's not weakness. That's intellectual strength, because it's being able to hold two opinions at one time. You don't need to become stronger by making sure nobody can ever prove you wrong. You can become stronger by being secure enough to discover that you were trying to survive it. You survived it. Number 4, stop using anger to communicate what you couldn't communicate calmly. A lot of men were never really taught about how to express difficult emotions. They were taught how to suppress them. So they stay quiet a lot of the times. They ignore things. They say they're fine, and they let resentment build over time. And then eventually they absolutely explode. And afterwards they think like this, why did I get so angry? Because the anger probably wasn't the beginning of the problem. It was the end of a long period of not saying what needed to be said. You really were uncomfortable. Maybe you didn't want to disappoint someone. Maybe you were afraid of conflict. Maybe you thought being honest would make you look weak. So you stayed silent until you couldn't. Maturity means learning to communicate a lot earlier. So it's being able to kind of envisage what's going to happen in the future. Instead of waiting until you're furious, you're going to say something like, that actually bothered me. Instead of becoming passive aggressive, you say, I didn't appreciate that. Instead of disappearing, you say, I need some space and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Instead of pretending you're okay, you say something along the lines of, I'm frustrated right now and I don't want to have this conversation while I'm angry. That's emotional control, and that's super, super massive awareness. Not ever feeling anger, knowing what to do with it. And there's another important distinction. Being calm doesn't mean allowing people to disrespect you. You can be firm without being aggressive. You can set a boundary without threatening somebody. You can walk away without slamming that door. You can say no without insulting the person who asked. Real strength gives you more control over your own behaviour. It doesn't give you less. The goal isn't to become a man who never gets angry. The goal is to become a man who doesn't need anger to feel powerful. And that's a massive distinction. Number 5, stop making promises to yourself that you repeatedly break. This one is really uncomfortable because most people think self-confidence comes from thinking positively about yourself. But a huge part of confidence comes from trusting yourself. And you build that trust through evidence. If you constantly tell yourself, I'm going to start training, I'm going to stop wasting time, I'm going to save money, I'm going to wake up early, I'm going to finish that project, I'm going to stop texting that person, I'm going to start taking my life seriously, and then you repeatedly don't do it, eventually your brain learns something. It learns that your own promises don't actually hold much weight. And that's a massive problem. You can have all the motivational quotes in the world, but if you don't trust yourself to follow through, what's going to happen is you won't feel particularly confident. So stop making dramatic promises, make smaller commitments. If you say you're going to train 3 times a week, train 3 times a week. If you say you're going to spend an hour working on something, give it that hour. If you say you're going to stop contacting someone who clearly doesn't want contact, keep your word. You don't need to completely transform your life next Monday. You don't need to become someone whose word means something, especially to yourself. And that's where New Year, New Me becomes such a paradox, because a lot of people don't follow it because it's really hard to follow. People usually quit after 30 days or so, and what that creates a sort of like resentment towards building new goals and having something to actually commit to. So make fewer promises, make them realistic, keep them. Your identity is built partly from what you repeatedly prove to yourself. Number 6, stop comparing life to people you don't actually know. Social media makes this incredibly difficult. You see somebody's body, their relationship, their business, the house, the holidays, the friends. You see all these pictures that make them seem like the best person in the world. You see the confidence, the money, you see the career, you see all of these things, and then what you do is you compare all that to your own private reality. But you're comparing your behind the scenes footage to somebody else's highlights. You don't know what their relationship is actually like. You don't know how much debt they have. You don't know how happy they actually are. You don't know how much of the confidence is actual pure confidence or just a show. You don't know what they're struggling with when the camera is turned off. And even if everything you're seeing is completely genuine, you're still missing something. Their life isn't your life. You have different circumstances, different sort of strengths. You've got different weaknesses even, and you've even got different priorities. So that makes things completely different. Don't forget that you've got different starting points as well. Comparison can sometimes be a useful tool, but it is the thief of joy. And you can look at someone successful and learn from them. You can see someone fitter than you and let that motivate you. You can notice someone building something and ask why they're doing it differently. But there's a massive difference between inspiration and self-content. Inspiration says, that's possible. What can I learn? Comparison says, why am I not already there? One creates action, the other creates shame. Shame is a terrible long-term strategy for building a really good life. So when you catch yourself comparing, ask a better question. Why don't I have what he has? Ask this instead. What can I learn from what he's doing? Then bring your attention back to yourself, to your own life, because you don't need to win somebody else's race. You need to run yours properly. Number 7 is stop tolerating things just because you're afraid of losing them. The biggest lessons in self-respect. Sometimes you know something isn't good for you. You know the friendship is actually one-sided. You know the relationship is unhealthy. You know the environment brings out the worst in you. You know the people around you don't respect your boundaries. You're still staying because leaving would hurt you. And it would hurt your ego, and sometimes you convince yourself that staying is the mature thing to do. But patience and self-abandonment are not the same thing. You can be patient with someone who is struggling. You can work through problems. You can give people second chances. You can have difficult seasons in relationships. But there is a difference between supporting somebody through a difficult period and repeatedly attempting behaviour that damages you. You stay because you're afraid. You're afraid that you'll never find anything better. Sometimes you stay because you've already invested all those years. Sometimes you stay because you don't want to be alone. And sometimes you even stay because leaving would force you to admit that the thing you wanted wasn't actually what you thought it was. But time invested isn't a reason to keep investing. A fear of being alone isn't a good reason to remain somewhere that makes you completely miserable. A mature man doesn't leave at the first inconvenience, but he also doesn't overstay his welcome because leaving is uncomfortable. He asks, is this difficult because it's worth working through? Or is this difficult because I keep ignoring something I already know? Those are very different situations. Self-respect isn't about walking away from someone who disappoints you. It's about knowing what you're willing to accept and what you're not. Sometimes loving someone means working through quite a difficult period, and sometimes loving yourself means admitting that something isn't healthy anymore. Number 8 is stop waiting to feel motivated. This is one of the biggest differences between wanting a better life and actually building one. A lot of people think motivation comes first. They imagine that one day they'll wake up feeling incredibly driven. They'll suddenly want to train. They'll suddenly want to work. They'll suddenly want to clean the house. Don't get me wrong, we do have moments like that in life. But the difference is when you decide to focus on motivation, which is quite unreliable, you start to dwindle in your performance, because some days you'll feel inspired, other days you'll feel tired. Some mornings you'll wake up excited about your goals, other mornings you'll want to stay in bed. If your behaviour depends entirely on how you feel, your results will really be inconsistent. Maturity means learning to do important things even when you don't particularly feel like doing them. Not everything. You don't need to turn yourself into a machine. Rest matters, enjoyment matters, spontaneity matters. But if something genuinely matters to you, you can't wait for the perfect emotional state before acting. You go to the gym when you're not excited, when you're not feeling it, when you've not got the strength. You work on that business when nobody's praising you. You study when you'd rather watch television all day. You have the difficult conversation you've been avoiding. You clean that room. You clean your room. You make the appointment. You send that application that you've been dreading to send. You take the first step and something interesting, really interesting happens. Action often creates motivation. You don't always need to feel ready, because you never will be. Sometimes you just need to begin, you just need to start. Your version of you isn't the man who feels motivated every day. He's the man who has learned what deserves to be done, even on the days when motivation isn't there. Discipline isn't some kind of punishment. It's remembering what you said mattered to you. Number 9, stop trying to look successful and start becoming useful. This is a trap that can be especially difficult for men, because there's a lot of pressure to look like you've figured everything out, because competency is what drives a man. It's what makes a man attractive. You want to appear confident, successful, strong. You want to appear wealthy, you want to appear disciplined, you want to appear the popular person. But there's a difference between looking impressive and actually becoming impressive. You can buy things you can't afford. You can talk about goals without doing the work. And I'm often to blame for this. I talk about things that I don't usually do. You can post quotes about discipline while avoiding difficult tasks. You can talk about becoming successful while spending every evening consuming other people's content. You can build an image without building the substance underneath it. But eventually life asks for that substance. Can you solve problems? Can people rely on you? Can you keep your word? Can you handle pressure? Can you manage your money? Can you communicate? Can you take care of yourself? Can you learn something rather difficult? Can you stay calm when things don't go according to plan? Can you create something valuable in our world? That's where real confidence starts coming from. Competence. It's the proof of competence, not pretending you know everything, actually doing it and becoming capable at it. So instead of asking, how do I look successful? Instead, ask yourself this: how do I become useful? Learn the skill, do the work, save that money, get stronger, become dependable, build something that you admire, take responsibilities, and eventually you don't have to convince people you're capable. Your life starts demonstrating it for you. Number 10, stop abandoning yourself just to be liked. This might be the most important one, and I've talked about it in my videos before. There's nothing wrong with wanting people to like you. We're social creatures. We want connection. We strive for it. We want friendship. We want love. We want to be known. We want to be valued in this world. But there's a point where wanting to be liked becomes more important than actually respecting yourself. You say yes when you mean no. You laugh at things you don't find funny. You hide your opinions because you're afraid of that disagreement. You tolerate disrespect because you don't want conflict. You change your personality depending on where you are, and you pretend to not care about things you actually care about. You chase people who give you very little back, and eventually you might have lots of people around you, but very little sense of who you actually are. Maturity means becoming comfortable with the possibility that not everyone will like you, not because you're trying to be difficult, not because you want to become arrogant, but because authenticity requires some degree of risk. I'll say that again. Authenticity requires some degree of risk. You don't need to be able to say, no, I don't want to do that, I disagree, or that doesn't work for me, I actually care about this, I'd rather do something else, or I'm not comfortable with that. Sometimes someone won't like you for it, That's okay. You aren't supposed to be comfortable with everyone. The goal is not to become so agreeable that nobody ever dislikes you. The goal is to become someone whose relationships are based on reality, because the right people don't need you to constantly perform for them. They can handle you having opinions. They can handle you having those boundaries in place. They can handle you saying no. They can handle you being human. And you can give them the same freedom in return. That's what healthy relationships look like. Not two people desperately trying to avoid disappointing each other. Two people who are secure enough to be deadly honest with each other. And I think that's what maturity really comes down to. You stop performing. You stop chasing that person. You stop pretending. You stop reacting to everything. You stop trying to control how everyone sees you. And you start paying attention to the things you actually control. Your behaviour, your choices, the things that you do on a daily basis, your habits, your standards, your responsibilities, your intention, your attention to detail, your character. Because you can spend your entire life trying to control other people's opinion of you. Or you can spend that energy becoming someone that you respect. And I think the second option is a much better investment. You don't need to become emotionless. You don't need to stop caring. You don't need to become the loudest person in the room. You don't need to dominate people. You don't need everyone to know that you are confident. You don't need to prove that you're a man. You need to become dependable. You need to become honest. You need to become capable. You need to become comfortable with discomfort. You need to learn how to handle rejection without becoming bitter. You need to learn how to accept criticism without falling apart. You need to learn how to apologize without making excuses. And you need to learn how to walk away without needing revenge. Because maturity is one big transformation. It's a collection of small decisions. You decide not to send the angry message. You decide to keep the promise you made for yourself. You decide to have the difficult conversation. You decide to go to the gym even though you don't feel like it. You decide not to chase someone who isn't reciprocating. You decide to apologise. You decide to stop compromising. You decide to put your phone down and do something meaningful. You decide to tell the truth. And then you decide to walk away from something that keeps making you smaller. And slowly, what happens is those decisions become your character. And that, my friends, is how you change. Not by announcing that you're becoming a different man, but by behaving differently when nobody's watching. So, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's this. Stop trying to become a man who looks strong. Become a man who can actually handle life. A man who can be rejected without becoming bitter. A man who can be criticised without falling apart. A man who can be alone without feeling worthless. A man who can succeed without becoming arrogant. A man who can fail without giving up. A man who can love without losing himself. A man who can say no without feeling guilty. A man who can say sorry without feeling humiliated. A man who can change his mind without feeling weak. And a man who can look at his own life and honestly say, I'm not where I want to be yet, but I trust myself to keep moving along, because you don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to stop betraying yourself in the small moments. Keep your word. Tell the truth. Do the work. Take responsibility for your actions. Treat people well. Protect your peace. Build something meaningful and keep becoming someone that you respect. That is maturity. And eventually you realise you weren't trying to become a different person. You were just removing the habits, fears and behaviours that were getting in the way of who you could have been all along. Thanks for watching.